Hello, my dear friends. As the night grows deeper and the world slowly becomes quiet, let us travel far north, to a land shaped by wind, darkness, and long winters. Imagine the Viking world, where the cold was not an occasional visitor, but a constant companion. Here, winter did not simply arrive and leave. It settled in, pressing down on the land for months at a time, shaping every part of daily life. For the Vikings, the coldest night of the year was not a surprise. It was expected. It was prepared for. It was feared, respected, and quietly accepted as part of existence. Survival depended not on strength alone, but on planning, memory, and community. Long before the coldest night arrived, people adjusted their lives to meet it. In the far north, daylight faded early. During deep winter, the sun barely rose, if it rose at all. Darkness stretched across the land, and with it came bitter cold that froze soil, water, and breath itself. This was the time when mistakes could not be corrected easily. A missing fire, damp clothing, or poor shelter could mean death before morning. Viking homes were built with this night in mind. Longhouses were not designed for beauty or comfort. They were designed to survive. Thick walls made of wood, turf, and stone trapped heat inside. Roofs were low, keeping warmth close to the body. Smoke from central hearth fires filled the space, irritating the eyes but preserving heat. Smoke was accepted because warmth mattered more than comfort. On the coldest night, the fire was never allowed to die. Fuel had been gathered months earlier. Wood was stacked carefully and guarded. Dried animal dung was also used when wood was scarce. Nothing that could burn was wasted. Children learned early that fire was life itself. Elders watched the hearth closely, knowing that a single mistake could freeze the household by dawn. Clothing was another layer of survival. Vikings did not rely on a single garment. They wore layers of wool, linen, and animal skins. Wool was especially valuable because it retained warmth even when damp. Cloaks were wrapped tightly around the body. Hoods covered heads and ears. Hands were kept close to the body whenever possible. Exposure was minimized, not challenged. The coldest night was not a time for travel. Vikings understood their limits. Boats were pulled from icy waters. Tools were stored. Doors were secured. Movement was reduced to what was absolutely necessary. Risk was avoided, not admired. Survival meant knowing when not to act. Food played a silent but critical role. During winter, fresh food was rare. Vikings relied on stored supplies prepared during warmer months. Dried fish, salted meat, smoked foods, and preserved dairy provided energy needed to generate body heat. Eating enough was not indulgence, it was protection against the cold. Community mattered deeply on this night. Families stayed close together. Bodies shared warmth. Animals were often brought inside or kept in nearby shelters to prevent freezing. The presence of others was comforting and practical. Isolation increased danger. Togetherness reduced it. The coldest night was also shaped by belief. Vikings did not see winter as meaningless suffering. It was part of the world's order. Stories were told of gods and spirits who controlled cold and darkness. These stories did not remove danger, but they gave it meaning. Meaning helped people endure what could not be changed. Silence filled the longhouse as the night deepened. Outside, wind moved across frozen land. Inside, people listened to the crackle of fire and the breathing of those beside them. Sleep came lightly. The cold was always present, even indoors. but preparedness turned fear into vigilance. The Vikings did not survive the coldest night by chance. They survived because every part of their life was shaped by the knowledge that winter would come, darkness would deepen, and warmth would be fragile. Survival was not dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and practiced. As this first long part settles into the darkness, imagine that longhouse glowing faintly against the frozen world outside. The night is cold, silent, and vast. Inside, life continues, carefully guarded until morning. As the coldest night of the year settled over the Viking world, daily life shifted into its most careful and deliberate form. Winter routines were not temporary habits. They were systems refined over generations, shaped by observation, loss, and survival. Every action during this night followed patterns learned long before, passed quietly from elders to the young. Inside the longhouse, movement slowed. The goal was not activity but preservation. Vikings understood that unnecessary motion wasted energy. Energy meant warmth. Warmth meant life. People stayed close to the hearth, arranging themselves in ways that shared heat efficiently. Sleeping areas were positioned along the walls, where bodies could lie side by side, wrapped in layered wool and animal skins. Sleep itself was different during this night. Vikings did not expect deep, uninterrupted rest. Cold kept the body alert. People slept lightly, waking often to tend the fire or adjust coverings. Someone was always responsible for watching the hearth. This duty rotated quietly. Fire was checked, fuel added, embers stirred gently to keep heat alive without letting flames grow too large. Children slept closest to adults, protected by bodies on either side. Elders were given positions near the fire where warmth was strongest. This arrangement was not sentimental. It was practical. The most vulnerable were placed where survival chances were highest. Body heat was treated as a shared resource. Cloaks and blankets were layered deliberately. Materials mattered. Wool was preferred because it trapped heat even in damp air. Animal furs added insulation. Clothing was worn even during sleep. Removing garments was rare in winter. Skin exposed to cold air risked frost injury. Before night fully arrived, food was eaten deliberately. Heavy meals were common on the coldest nights. Fat-rich foods were especially valued. The Vikings understood through experience that the body produced more heat when digesting dense food. Eating was preparation, not comfort. Water was handled carefully. Fresh water sources often froze. Melted snow was used sparingly. Excess moisture inside the longhouse was avoided, as dampness increased cold. Wet clothing was dried near the fire before nightfall whenever possible. Entering the night with damp fabric was dangerous. Doors were sealed tightly. Any gaps were blocked with cloth, wood, or turf. Wind was an enemy. Drafts could lower the temperature quickly. The longhouse became a closed world, focused inward, separated from the frozen landscape outside. Animals played a role in survival as well. Livestock were kept in nearby shelters or within sections of the longhouse. Their body heat added warmth. Their presence reduced heat loss. This practice was common and intentional despite noise and smell. Silence was respected, not out of ritual but awareness. Listening mattered. Wind direction, creaking wood, changes in fire sound, all signaled shifts in temperature or danger. People listened as much as they rested. The Vikings did not view this night as extraordinary. It was expected. What mattered was discipline. The routines followed during the coldest night were the same routines followed throughout winter, refined for the harshest conditions. Survival depended on consistency, not courage. As the night deepened, the longhouse remained still. Outside, the cold pressed against walls and roofs. Inside, life endured through careful habit, shared warmth, and watchful rest. Long before the coldest night of the year arrived, Viking survival was already in motion. Winter was not faced suddenly. It was anticipated months in advance, woven into every decision made during spring, summer, and autumn. The coldest night was survived not through courage but through preparation remembered and repeated year after year. Food was the foundation of that preparation. In the Viking world, winter food was not about variety or taste. It was about endurance. Fresh food disappeared early in the cold season, and what remained had to last through months of darkness and freezing temperatures. Every household understood that failure to prepare meant hunger, weakness, and death before spring. Fish played a central role. During warmer months, fish were caught in large numbers and dried in open air or smoked over low fires. Drying removed moisture, preventing rot. Smoked fish lasted longer and provided fat and protein essential for warmth. These fish were stored carefully, protected from moisture and animals, and rationed throughout winter. Meat from livestock was preserved with equal care. Animals were slaughtered in autumn before winter made feeding them impossible. Meat was salted heavily, dried or smoked. Salt was valuable and used wisely. Preserved meat was tough and strong in flavor, but it provided the energy needed to survive cold nights. Waste was unthinkable. Dairy products were also preserved. Milk could not be stored fresh, but it could be transformed. Butter and cheese became winter staples. These foods contained fat, which the Vikings understood was vital for warmth. Fat helped the body resist cold, and during the coldest nights, such foods were eaten deliberately. Grain was stored with caution. Barley and oats were kept dry and protected from damp air. These grains were used to make thick porridge and bread. Meals were filling, designed to sit heavy in the stomach, generating warmth through digestion. Eating lightly in winter was dangerous. Storage spaces were part of the household design. Food was kept in cool, dry areas, sometimes underground, sometimes raised above ground to avoid moisture. Containers were sealed with care. Families checked stores regularly, knowing that spoilage discovered too late could be fatal. On the coldest night of the year, food was eaten with awareness. People did not overeat, but they did not starve themselves either. Portions were measured to balance immediate warmth with long-term survival. The goal was to make it through the night without weakening the body for the weeks still ahead. Sharing food reinforced survival. Households supported one another when possible. Complete isolation was dangerous. Communities that shared resources survived better than those that did not. Winter strengthened social bonds through necessity. The act of eating itself was calm and deliberate. There was no rush. Food was consumed near the fire, slowly, allowing heat to spread through the body. After eating, people wrapped themselves again in layers, conserving the warmth created. The Vikings did not survive the coldest night because they were fearless. They survived because hunger was prevented long before cold arrived. Preparation replaced panic. Memory replaced uncertainty. As the night deepened and the fire burned steadily, stored food quietly fulfilled its purpose. Each preserved piece represented foresight, discipline, and the understanding that winter rewarded those who remembered its power. For the Vikings, surviving the coldest night of the year was not only a physical challenge, it was also a mental one. Darkness in the far north was deep and long, and winter nights stretched endlessly. To endure this, the Vikings relied not just on fire and food, but on belief, memory, and shared understanding of the world around them. The Viking world was shaped by stories. These stories explained why winter came, why darkness grew so powerful, and why survival mattered. Cold was not random. It was part of a living world governed by forces greater than any one person. This belief helped people accept what could not be changed and focus on what could be controlled. During the coldest nights, stories of the gods were remembered quietly inside the longhouse. Odin, the All-Father, was associated with wisdom gained through suffering and endurance. His sacrifices reminded people that survival required patience and restraint. Thor, protector of humanity, represented strength against chaos and danger. His presence symbolized protection during storms and harsh weather. Winter itself was often connected to powerful forces. The giants of frost and ice were believed to dwell in the cold places beyond human settlement. These beings were not seen as imaginary threats, but as symbols of nature's raw power. Cold was respected, not challenged. Respect guided behavior. Recklessness was avoided. The concept of fate played an important role. Vikings believed that life followed a path shaped by destiny, but this did not mean passivity. Fate explained uncertainty, while preparation shaped outcome. A person who prepared well honored the order of the world. A person who ignored winter's demands disrupted balance. Darkness was also understood through belief. Long nights were not empty time. They were periods of waiting, reflection, and stillness. Activity slowed because the world itself slowed. This rhythm was accepted as natural. Fighting against it wasted energy and invited danger. Children learned these ideas early. Elders spoke calmly about winter as something to live with, not fear. Fear weakened the mind. Acceptance strengthened it. Stories taught patience and endurance rather than panic. During the coldest night, belief created calm. Knowing that winter had meaning made endurance possible. People focused on routine, shared presence, and quiet awareness. The mind rested even when the body remained alert. The Vikings did not survive because belief removed cold. They survived because belief helped them endure it without despair. Mental steadiness preserved physical strength. Stories softened the weight of darkness. As the fire flickered low and the night stretched onward, belief filled the longhouse as quietly as warmth. Outside, cold ruled the land. Inside, understanding held people steady until morning. Clothing was one of the most important reasons the Vikings survived the coldest night of the year. In a land where winter air could burn exposed skin and frost could settle inside the lungs, clothing was not decoration. It was protection. Every layer, every stitch, and every material reflected generations of experience with extreme cold. The Vikings understood their environment deeply. They did not rely on a single heavy garment. Instead, they built warmth in layers. This trapped heat close to the body and allowed flexibility. If a layer became damp, another could protect beneath it. This system mattered greatly during the longest and coldest nights. Wool was the foundation of Viking winter clothing. Sheep were raised not only for meat but for their wool, which was spun and woven carefully by hand. Wool had one powerful advantage. It kept warmth even when damp. Snow melted, breath condensed, and moisture gathered inside longhouses, yet wool continued to insulate the body. This quality saved lives. Underlayers were usually made of linen or fine wool. These garments rested directly against the skin, absorbing moisture and reducing irritation. Over them came thicker wool tunics and trousers. These outer layers were loose enough to trap warm air, but fitted enough to prevent drafts. Animal skins added another barrier against cold. Fur-lined cloaks were worn during the coldest periods. These cloaks were wrapped tightly around the shoulders and body, secured with simple pins or ties. The fur faced inward, holding warmth close, while the outer hide blocked wind and snow. Head coverings were essential. Heat escaped quickly through the head, and Vikings protected it carefully. Woolen caps, hoods, and scarves were common. Ears, neck, and face were shielded whenever possible. Frostbite was a real danger, and prevention mattered more than appearance. Hands and feet required special care. Gloves and mittens made from wool or animal skin protected fingers during necessary tasks. Footwear was layered as well. Leather shoes were lined with wool or fur. Extra cloth was sometimes wrapped around feet for insulation. Wet footwear was dangerous and dried carefully near the fire before nightfall. Clothing was worn continuously during winter nights. Undressing fully was rare. Sleep came wrapped in layers, cloaks pulled close, bodies pressed together for shared warmth. Comfort was secondary to survival. Repair was constant. Clothing was mended repeatedly. A tear allowed cold air inside and had to be fixed immediately. Needles, thread, and spare cloth were always kept nearby. Clothing maintenance was a daily responsibility, especially during winter. The coldest night demanded discipline. People adjusted layers carefully before settling down. Too little clothing invited freezing. Too much could cause sweating, which later increased cold. Balance was learned through experience. Children were taught these lessons early. They learned how to wrap themselves, how to recognize dangerous cold, and how to protect vulnerable skin. Knowledge passed quietly, without written instruction, reinforced by routine. The Vikings did not challenge winter by exposing themselves to it. They respected it by preparing against it. Clothing transformed the cold from a killer into a condition that could be endured. As the coldest night stretched onward, cloaks pulled tight and wool pressed close to skin, bodies remained warm enough to survive. Outside, frost covered the land. Inside, layered clothing quietly did its work, holding life together until dawn. When the coldest night of the year finally arrived, sleep itself became a careful act of survival for the Vikings. Rest was necessary, yet dangerous. The body needed stillness to recover, but stillness allowed cold to settle. Because of this, Viking sleeping arrangements were shaped by deep understanding of heat, movement, and shared space. The longhouse was designed with sleep in mind. Along the inner walls ran raised platforms made of wood or packed earth. These platforms lifted sleepers slightly above the cold ground, reducing heat loss. The coldest air settled low, so even a small elevation made a difference during freezing nights. Sleeping positions were deliberate. People lay close together, often side by side, sometimes partially overlapping. This was not accidental or emotional. Shared body heat was one of the strongest defenses against extreme cold. Heat moved naturally between bodies, creating a warmer shared space than any single person could manage alone. Cloaks and blankets were layered carefully. Animal skins were placed closest to the body for insulation, with wool blankets layered above to trap heat. The arrangement mattered. If heavy materials were placed incorrectly, cold air could slip through gaps. Elders taught younger members how to arrange coverings properly before sleep. The hearth remained central even during rest. The fire was allowed to burn low but never fully out. Embers glowed throughout the night. Someone was always responsible for waking periodically to feed the fire. This role rotated quietly, without ceremony. Fire watching was a duty, not an honor. Breathing itself was considered. Cold air entering the lungs could weaken the body. Many Vikings slept with cloaks or cloth drawn near their faces, warming inhaled air. This reduced shock to the lungs and conserved heat. Movement during sleep was limited. Tossing and turning exposed skin and broke shared warmth. People learned to remain relatively still once settled. Sleep came lightly, broken into short periods rather than long, deep rest. This pattern was accepted and expected during the harshest winter nights. Children slept between adults whenever possible. This provided protection from cold and ensured quick response if they became uncomfortable or unwell. Elders, whose bodies retained less heat, were positioned closer to the hearth. These arrangements reflected practical care rather than hierarchy. Noise was minimal. Speaking was unnecessary. Silence conserved energy and allowed people to listen for changes. Wind against the walls, shifts in fire sound, or the creak of frozen wood. Awareness continued even in rest. No one expected the coldest night to be comfortable. Comfort was not the goal. Endurance was. Sleep served survival, not luxury. The body rested enough to continue, not enough to forget danger. By dawn, when pale light returned slowly to the frozen land, those who had followed routine and restraint woke stiff, but alive. The night had passed, not because the cold had weakened, but because the Vikings had learned how to rest without surrendering warmth. As this part settles into quiet reflection, imagine bodies lying still in layered warmth, fire glowing softly, breath rising slowly into the smoky air. Outside, winter holds the land tightly. Inside, careful rest carries life forward. Fire was the heart of survival during the coldest night of the year in the Viking world. More than shelter, more than clothing, more than food, fire stood between life and freezing death. The Vikings understood this deeply, and because of that, fire was treated with constant care, planning, and respect. Fire management was not something done only during winter nights. It was a year-round responsibility. Long before winter arrived, Vikings gathered fuel deliberately. Wood was cut, split, and dried during warmer months. Damp wood was dangerous in winter because it produced smoke without heat. Dry fuel was guarded carefully, stored where snow and moisture could not reach it. On the coldest night, every piece of fuel mattered. Nothing was wasted. Large flames were avoided because they consumed fuel too quickly. Instead, Vikings relied on controlled, steady heat. Embers were more valuable than flames. A low, glowing fire produced warmth for hours and conserved fuel through the night. The hearth was built for this purpose. It sat at the center of the longhouse, surrounded by stone or packed earth. This design absorbed heat and released it slowly. Even when flames lowered, warmth remained trapped in the structure. Smoke filled the space, but smoke was accepted as the price of warmth. Fire duty was shared. Someone always remained aware of the hearth even while others rested. This person listened to the sound of burning wood, watched the glow of embers, and adjusted fuel quietly. Letting the fire die during the coldest night was unthinkable. Rekindling from cold ash was difficult and risky. When wood supplies were low, Vikings used alternatives. Dried animal dung burned slowly and provided steady heat. Peat was also used in some regions. These fuels were less efficient, but reliable. Every available source of heat was valued. Fire also dried the air inside the longhouse. Moisture increased cold and weakened clothing insulation. Keeping garments and bedding dry was as important as keeping them warm. Wet wool lost effectiveness. Damp skins froze. Fire prevented this by maintaining a stable environment. Children were taught early that fire demanded respect. Playing near the hearth was discouraged during winter. Burns were dangerous and slow to heal. Fire was not a toy or decoration. It was life itself. The coldest night required patience. Fire was not allowed to burn brightly early in the evening. Fuel was saved for the deepest hours of night when temperatures dropped further. Elders understood this pattern and guided others quietly. Firelight also shaped behavior. People stayed near the hearth, limiting movement. Shadows flickered across walls, but attention remained inward. The outside world faded into darkness and cold, while the longhouse focused on preserving heat. The Vikings did not defeat the cold with fire. They negotiated with it. Fire created a fragile boundary between warmth and freezing air. That boundary was protected carefully, hour after hour, until morning returned. As this long part settles into the stillness of night, imagine embers glowing softly, smoke drifting upward, and bodies gathered close around the hearth. Outside, winter presses in. Inside, fire holds its ground, carrying the household through the coldest hours of the year. The coldest night of the year was never faced alone in the Viking world. Survival was not an individual task. It was a shared responsibility, deeply woven into the structure of Viking society. Community was not simply social connection. It was a system of survival shaped by winter, scarcity, and long memory. Viking settlements were built with closeness in mind. Homes were grouped together rather than spread far apart. This reduced exposure to wind and cold, and allowed people to support one another quickly. During the harshest winter nights, isolation increased danger. Proximity increased survival. Each household understood its role within the community. Families prepared not only for themselves but with awareness of neighbors. Food shortages, illness, or fire failure could affect everyone. Because of this, winter planning extended beyond individual homes. Cooperation reduced risk for the whole settlement. During the coldest nights, people checked on one another quietly. This was not dramatic or formal. A visit, a shared fire, or exchanged fuel ensured that no hearth went dark unnoticed. A failed fire in one home could signal danger for all, especially in extreme cold. Elders played a central role in maintaining winter discipline. Their experience guided behavior. They remembered winters when preparation failed and consequences followed. Their authority came not from power, but from survival knowledge. During long nights, their words carried weight. Rules were not written, but understood. Hoarding fuel or food while neighbors suffered was dangerous behavior. It weakened trust and threatened collective survival. Communities depended on balance. Excess in one home often meant shortage in another. Children learned these values naturally. They observed adults sharing resources and supporting one another. Winter taught them early that survival depended on cooperation, not strength alone. These lessons were reinforced every cold season. Illness during winter was treated with caution. A sick person weakened the group if ignored. Care was shared quietly. Warmth, food, and rest were provided when possible. Healing was slow, but neglect was deadly. Community responsibility also included protection of the vulnerable. Elders, children, and the injured were prioritized for warmth and food. This was not sentiment, it was strategy. Losing experience or future strength harmed the whole group. Winter nights strengthened bonds through necessity. Shared silence, shared fire, and shared endurance created deep trust. People learned who could be relied upon when survival was fragile. The Vikings did not survive the coldest night because individuals were strong. They survived because society was structured to carry weakness together. Strength flowed through connection. As this long part settles into quiet reflection, imagine multiple longhouses glowing faintly across a frozen landscape. Smoke rises slowly into the dark sky. Inside each home, people rest, knowing others remain nearby. Together, they wait for morning. Extreme cold did not only threaten the Vikings with hunger or freezing sleep. It attacked the body slowly and quietly. During the coldest night of the year, illness and injury were constant dangers, and the Vikings understood that surviving winter required careful attention to the body itself. Frost injury was one of the most feared risks. Exposed skin could freeze quickly, especially on the face, ears, fingers, and toes. Vikings learned through experience to recognize early signs. Numbness, stiffness, and loss of feeling were warnings. Ignoring them meant permanent damage or loss of body parts. Protection began before injury occurred. Skin was covered as completely as possible. Cloth was wrapped around vulnerable areas. Faces were shielded with hoods and scarves. Hands were kept close to the body when not needed. Movement was slow and deliberate to avoid sudden exposure. If frost injury began, treatment was gentle. Frozen skin was warmed slowly, never suddenly. Rubbing snow on frozen flesh was avoided, as it damaged tissue further. Instead, warmth from hands, breath, or shared body heat was used. Healing was slow and uncertain, but careful response increased survival. Cold also weakened the body's resistance to illness. Respiratory problems were common during long winters. Cold air irritated the lungs. Smoke from the hearth added strain. Vikings accepted this discomfort but tried to reduce its impact by keeping fire smoke steady rather than heavy, and by warming inhaled air with cloth. Illness was treated with rest, warmth, and food. There were no cures in the modern sense. Healing relied on patience and care. A sick person was kept near the fire, wrapped tightly, and fed when possible. Cold worsened illness quickly, so protection was constant. Fatigue increased vulnerability. Exhaustion weakened judgment and body strength. During the coldest night, unnecessary work was avoided. People conserved energy intentionally. Rest was not laziness, it was survival. Wounds healed slowly in winter. Cold reduced blood flow and slowed recovery. Even small injuries could become serious if exposed. Because of this, dangerous tasks were postponed. Tools were handled carefully. Risk was minimized. The Vikings also understood that emotional stress weakened the body. Panic led to poor decisions. Calm preserved strength. This is why winter behavior was disciplined and quiet. Order reduced mistakes. Children and elders required special attention. Their bodies lost heat faster. They were checked often. Any sign of illness or injury was addressed immediately. Neglect could turn fatal overnight. The coldest night tested not only shelter and supplies, but awareness. Survival depended on noticing small changes in the body before they became irreversible. Knowledge passed through observation rather than instruction. The Vikings did not conquer cold-related illness, they managed it. They accepted limits and worked within them. Survival meant reducing harm, not eliminating it. As this long part settles into stillness, imagine careful hands adjusting cloth, quiet movements near the fire, and watchful eyes noticing breath and color. Outside, the night remains harsh. Inside, attention keeps bodies alive until morning. The coldest night of the year brought with it a silence unlike any other. In the Viking world, winter silence was not empty. It was dense, heavy, and full of meaning. Sound behaved differently in extreme cold, and the Vikings learned to listen carefully, because listening was part of survival. As temperatures dropped, the land itself seemed to hold its breath. Snow absorbed sound. Wind carried it farther. A single noise could travel across frozen ground and still air. Because of this, Vikings moved more quietly during the coldest nights. Noise wasted energy and disrupted focus. Stillness preserved both. Inside the longhouse, sound was measured. The crackle of the fire was constant and reassuring. Changes in that sound mattered. A dull, fading crackle signaled dying embers. A sudden loud snap could mean shifting fuel or collapsing wood. These sounds guided quiet action without words. The structure of the longhouse also responded to cold. Wood contracted, beams creaked, walls shifted slightly under frost. These sounds were familiar. Vikings learned which noises were normal and which signaled danger, such as roof stress from snow or wind forcing its way inside. Outside silence carried warnings. The absence of wind could be more dangerous than its presence. Still air allowed temperatures to drop sharply. Elders recognized this and prepared accordingly, adding fuel or adjusting coverings before the cold deepened further. Animals contributed to the soundscape. Livestock stirred, breathed, and shifted nearby. Sudden restlessness could signal cold stress or approaching danger. Animals were watched closely, not for comfort, but because their behavior reflected environmental change. Darkness heightened awareness. Without light, hearing became more important. People listened for steps, shifting snow, or unusual sounds near doors and walls. While winter reduced threats from outsiders, awareness remained essential. Silence also shaped behavior. Conversation was minimal. Words created moisture in breath and disrupted rest. Communication became brief and purposeful. Gestures replaced speech. Quiet conserved warmth. The Vikings did not fear winter silence. They respected it. Silence provided information. It revealed stability or change. Those who listened survived longer than those who ignored it. During the coldest night, listening replaced watching. Eyes saw little. Ears detected danger early. Awareness extended beyond sleep. Even resting bodies remained partly alert. This quiet discipline did not come from fear. It came from experience. Winter punished inattention quickly. Listening allowed response before harm. As this very long part settles into the stillness of night, imagine a longhouse where fire murmurs softly, breath rises gently, and the world outside rests in frozen quiet. Within that silence, life continues, guided by careful listening until dawn returns. When the longest and coldest night of the year finally loosened its grip, morning did not arrive suddenly in the Viking world. Light returned slowly, pale and weak, filtering through frost-covered air. This moment was not celebrated loudly. It was approached with caution. Survival was confirmed step by step. Inside the longhouse, people stirred carefully. Bodies were stiff from cold and stillness. Movement returned slowly, joints aching after hours of conserving heat. No one rushed outside. The cold often lingered after sunrise, and early exposure could undo a night of careful endurance. The first task was always the fire. Embers were examined closely. If the hearth still glowed even faintly, relief settled quietly through the household. The fire was strengthened slowly, never rushed, allowing warmth to return without wasting fuel. Fire meant continuity. Fire meant the household had passed the hardest test of winter. Next came the check of bodies. Children were examined gently for cold stress. Elders were watched closely for weakness or illness. Fingers, toes, ears, and faces were checked for signs of frost injury. These inspections were calm and practiced. Panic helped no one. Early attention could prevent long-term damage. Animals were checked as well. Livestock that survived the night meant food, labor, and continued stability. Losses were accepted quietly. Winter always took something. What mattered was whether the community could continue. Doors were opened cautiously. Cold air rushed in, sharp and biting. Snow was assessed. Roofs were examined for damage. Heavy snowfall or ice could collapse structures if ignored. Tools were used carefully to clear entrances and protect buildings. Food stores were reviewed. The coldest night often required extra fuel and nourishment. Supplies were adjusted accordingly. Rations were recalculated. Winter planning was ongoing, not finished with one night. People moved deliberately. No unnecessary tasks were attempted. The body needed time to recover. Fatigue was acknowledged. Rest followed effort, not celebration. Community awareness returned. Neighbors were checked. Smoke rising from nearby homes signaled survival. Absence of smoke required attention. Help was offered quietly where needed. Survival remained collective. Emotion was controlled. Relief existed, but it was contained. Winter was not over. Many cold nights still waited ahead. The Vikings understood this deeply. Passing the coldest night did not mean safety. It meant readiness had worked. Stories of the night might be shared later, not immediately. Memory mattered, but action mattered more. Lessons were absorbed silently. What held, what failed, what needed improvement before next winter. As the pale winter day stretched slowly onward, life resumed its careful rhythm. Survival continued, not as triumph, but as responsibility. As this long part settles into quiet reflection, imagine smoke rising once again from longhouses, breath visible in cold air, and people moving slowly but surely through the frozen world. The coldest night had passed. Life endured, one careful morning at a time. Surviving the coldest night of the year did not mean the danger had passed. For the Vikings, that night was only one point within a much longer season of hardship. Winter in the north was not measured in days, but in endurance. Darkness returned again and again. Cold tightened its grip repeatedly. Survival depended on sustaining discipline long after the hardest night was gone. Once the coldest night passed, Viking life did not relax. It narrowed. Energy was conserved even more carefully. The body, weakened by long hours of tension and cold, required protection in the days that followed. Muscles ached. Fingers remained stiff. Breath stayed shallow in frozen air. Winter left marks that could not be ignored. Daily routines adjusted to protect strength. Work outside the longhouse was reduced to essentials. Tasks were chosen carefully. Chopping wood, feeding animals, checking structures. Everything was done slowly and deliberately. Rushing wasted energy and increased injury risk. Winter punished impatience. Food consumption was adjusted again. After the coldest night, supplies were reassessed. Meals remained heavy but controlled. Eating too much risked running out later. Eating too little weakened the body. Balance was learned through long experience. Elders guided portions quietly, without argument. Darkness continued to shape time. Even after the solstice, daylight returned slowly. Mornings were dim. Evenings arrived early. The body adapted to this rhythm. Sleep patterns remained broken. Long rest was rare. Instead, Vikings rested in segments, preserving awareness while allowing recovery. Mental endurance mattered as much as physical strength. Long winters pressed heavily on the mind. Silence stretched. Movement slowed. The same walls, the same fire, the same faces filled every day. Vikings managed this by accepting repetition. Winter was not fought. It was endured. Storytelling, quiet conversation, and shared memory played a role here. Stories were not told to escape reality, but to stabilize it. They reminded people that winter had been survived before. That darkness always loosened eventually. These stories were anchors, not distractions. Clothing and shelter continued to be checked constantly. Damage from cold accumulated slowly. Cracks widened. Cloth thinned. Repairs were ongoing. A small tear ignored could become deadly later. Vigilance never ended. Illness often appeared after the coldest nights. The body weakened under strain. Coughs lingered, joints stiffened. Healing was slow. Care continued quietly, without expectation of quick recovery. Patience replaced urgency. Community support remained essential. A single household struggling weakened the entire settlement. Winter forced cooperation not through kindness, but necessity. Help was given because survival depended on it. Most importantly, the Vikings understood that winter survival was cumulative. Each night drained strength. Each morning demanded renewal. Endurance was not heroic. It was repetitive, quiet, and exhausting. The coldest night tested preparation. The weeks after tested discipline. As this very long part settles into the slow rhythm of winter days, imagine time stretching, light returning reluctantly, and people continuing their careful routines without celebration. Survival was not a moment. It was a season-long effort, repeated until the land softened again. As winter continued far beyond the coldest night, the Viking world entered its most demanding phase. The danger was no longer sudden cold or immediate freezing. The danger became slow exhaustion. This was the time when survival depended not on emergency response, but on long-term discipline, restraint, and mental steadiness. The landscape remained locked in ice. Snow-covered paths, fields, and forests. Familiar landmarks disappeared beneath white layers. Movement outside the settlement became difficult and dangerous. Vikings reduced travel to the bare minimum. Every step through snow cost energy, and energy was precious. Inside the longhouse, time felt different. Days blended together. Without strong daylight, the sense of morning and evening softened. People measured time through routine rather than clocks or sun. The fire was checked. Food was prepared. Clothing was mended. Rest followed effort. These cycles replaced the passage of days. Mental survival became central. Long winters tested patience deeply. Silence could stretch for hours. The same conversations repeated. The same tasks returned again and again. Vikings managed this by accepting repetition as normal. Winter was not expected to be interesting. It was expected to be endured. Children learned endurance by watching adults. There were no long explanations. Behavior taught survival quietly. Children learned to sit still longer, to speak less, to conserve movement. These lessons were absorbed naturally, shaped by the season itself. Work continued indoors whenever possible. Tools were repaired, fishing nets were checked, clothing was rewoven. These tasks kept hands moving without exposing bodies to cold air. Purpose mattered. Idleness weakened the mind. Controlled activity preserved it. Food preparation remained careful. Supplies diminished slowly. Elders tracked consumption mentally. There were no written records. Memory guided rationing. Mistakes were remembered from past winters. Hunger later in the season was more dangerous than discomfort earlier. The body adapted to cold over time, but never fully. Fingers remained stiff. Skin cracked. Breath stayed shallow. Pain became background noise. Vikings did not dramatize this discomfort. Complaining did not change the season. Acceptance reduced stress. Sleep patterns stayed broken. Deep rest was rare. People woke often, adjusting coverings, checking the fire, listening. This light sleep protected life, but it drained strength slowly. Fatigue became constant, managed rather than cured. Illness during this phase was especially dangerous. Bodies already weakened struggled to recover. Care was gentle and continuous. Healing took time. Survival often depended on whether sickness appeared early or late in winter. Community bonds were tested here. When supplies ran low, tension could rise. Successful settlements managed this through shared responsibility. Decisions were made collectively. Survival depended on fairness and memory. Belief continued to play a quiet role. Stories of earlier winters reminded people that survival was possible. Darkness had been endured before. Spring had returned. These memories did not remove hardship, but they steadied the mind. The Vikings did not view winter as an enemy to defeat. They viewed it as a force to live alongside. Endurance required humility. Nature did not negotiate. People adapted. As this very long part settles slowly, imagine weeks passing under snow, fire burning steadily, people moving carefully through repeated days. Winter holds the land firmly. Life continues through habit, patience, and shared resolve. As the long winter stretched onward, The idea of spring existed for the Vikings in a very quiet way. It was not celebrated. It was not counted down loudly. Hope during these months was dangerous if held too tightly. Expectation could weaken endurance. Instead, the Vikings treated spring as something distant, certain, but not urgent. The land gave no signs of change for a long time. Snow remained deep. Rivers stayed frozen. The sun rose only slightly higher each day, almost unnoticeably. Vikings did not mark these changes with excitement. They observed them calmly, knowing that noticing too much too early invited disappointment. Daily life remained narrow. No one behaved as if winter were ending soon. Clothing stayed heavy. Fire management remained strict. Food was still rationed carefully. Acting as if warmth had returned too early could undo months of discipline. Mentally, this period was the hardest. The body had adjusted to cold, but the mind grew tired of repetition. The same walls, the same routines, the same silence. Vikings endured this not by escaping it, but by accepting it fully. Winter was allowed to be long. Conversation stayed practical. There was little speculation about when spring would arrive. Elders avoided giving dates or promises. Experience taught them that nature did not follow human wishes. Certainty came only after proof. Children learned patience through this restraint. They learned not to ask when winter would end, but how to live while it continued. This lesson shaped character deeply. Endurance mattered more than optimism. Small signs of change were noticed privately. Slightly longer daylight, softer ice sounds, subtle changes in animal behavior. These signs were observed quietly, not announced. Hope was kept gentle. Work remained inward-focused. Repair continued. Tools were prepared slowly for future use, but without urgency. Readiness replaced anticipation. Physically, bodies remained guarded. Even small warmth changes could be deceptive. Thaw during the day often refroze at night, increasing danger. Vikings respected this instability and avoided risk. Emotionally, restraint protected morale. Celebrating too early weakened resolve. Winter had taught the Vikings that survival depended on calm continuation, not excitement. Community behavior reflected this mindset. No one relaxed rules until everyone could. Collective survival mattered more than individual hope. Belief systems reinforced patience. Stories reminded people that seasons followed cycles larger than any one life. This perspective softened frustration. As this long part settles slowly, imagine a frozen world that gives no promises, only continuity. Inside longhouses, people continue careful routines, not because they expect reward soon, but because survival still depends on discipline. Hope exists, but it waits quietly. When spring finally began to approach the Viking world, it did not arrive like a clear announcement. There was no sudden warmth, no instant relief, and no sharp line between winter and the new season. Instead, spring came slowly, carefully, almost cautiously, as if the land itself was testing whether it was safe to change. The Vikings understood this well. They did not treat early signs of spring as permission to relax. Winter had taught them patience, and that patience did not disappear overnight. Survival during this transition required as much discipline as survival during the coldest night itself. The first changes were subtle. Daylight lingered slightly longer in the sky. Shadows shifted almost imperceptibly. Snow began to soften during the day, only to freeze again at night. These changes created new dangers: slippery ground, weak ice, and unstable temperatures injured those who moved too quickly. Because of this, Vikings maintained winter routines longer than felt comfortable. Clothing stayed heavy. Cloaks remained wrapped tightly. Fire was managed with the same care as before. Acting too early as if winter had ended could undo months of endurance. Food consumption remained cautious. Even as winter stores neared their end, Vikings resisted the urge to eat freely. Spring could still fail. Late storms were common. Hunger at the end of winter was often the most dangerous hunger of all. Mentally, this phase required restraint. After months of darkness and cold, the desire for movement and change was strong. But experienced elders tempered this urge. They reminded others that impatience had cost lives in past seasons. Discipline did not end when hope appeared. It ended only when safety returned. Work outside increased slowly. Roofs were checked for damage. Snow was cleared carefully. Tools were prepared for use but not rushed into action. Fields were inspected, not planted. Rivers were watched closely for ice movement. Awareness replaced excitement. Bodies during this time were vulnerable. Muscles weakened by winter reacted poorly to sudden exertion. Injuries were common if work resumed too fast. Vikings paced themselves deliberately, allowing strength to return gradually. Community coordination remained important. Decisions about movement, travel, and labor were shared. No household acted alone. A single mistake could strain shared resources or force others into risk. Emotionally, relief came quietly. There were no celebrations yet. Relief was expressed through continued survival rather than joy. The memory of winter remained close enough to encourage caution. Belief systems reinforced this patience. Stories reminded people that seasons turned in cycles, not moments. Spring was not a reward for surviving winter. It was simply the next phase of existence. Only when ice retreated steadily, when nights grew consistently warmer, and when the land responded reliably, did Vikings begin to loosen their winter discipline. Even then, habits faded slowly. Winter had shaped behavior deeply. The coldest night had been survived long ago, but its lessons lingered. They remained in how people moved, planned, and restrained themselves even as the world softened. As this very long part settles into calm reflection, imagine a land slowly waking, still cautious, still cold, but changing. Inside Viking settlements, people continue measured routines, carrying winter's discipline forward until warmth is truly secure. When winter finally loosened its hold, Viking society did not return suddenly to expansion or movement. The end of extreme cold did not mean the end of caution. Winter left behind exhaustion, weakness, and lessons that could not be ignored. Life after the coldest season required a slow and deliberate reset. The first priority after winter was recovery, not productivity. Bodies needed time to rebuild strength. Muscles that had remained still for months were weak. Joints were stiff. Illness lingered. Vikings allowed this recovery to happen gradually. Pushing the body too quickly after winter caused injury and sickness. Experience had taught them patience. Daily routines expanded carefully. Tasks that had been postponed slowly returned. Repairs began in earnest. Roofs damaged by snow were reinforced. Walls weakened by frost were strengthened. Tools dulled by months of inactivity were sharpened slowly. Everything was done step by step without urgency. Food habits shifted cautiously. Fresh supplies were still limited. Winter stores were nearly exhausted. Fishing and early foraging resumed slowly as conditions allowed. Meals remained controlled. Hunger still posed danger until reliable food sources returned. Social behavior also changed slowly. Winter had compressed life inward. Families had lived closely, sharing silence and space. When movement increased again, separation felt unfamiliar. People adjusted gradually, relearning distance and independence without losing connection. Children returned to outdoor movement carefully. Elders watched closely. Accidents were common during this phase, as bodies tested limits too soon. Communities responded by reinforcing patience rather than speed. Belief continued to shape behavior. Survival through winter was not viewed as achievement to celebrate loudly. It was seen as responsibility fulfilled. Life continued because discipline had held. Pride was avoided. Humility preserved caution. Memory played an important role here. Elders reminded others of winters when impatience had caused loss. These memories were not shared dramatically. They were shared quietly, as warnings rather than stories. The environment itself demanded respect. Spring weather remained unstable. Sudden storms, refreezing nights, and flooding rivers punished carelessness. Vikings treated early warmth as temporary, not permanent. Community coordination remained strong. Large projects waited until safety was clear. Travel resumed slowly. Boats were inspected but not rushed into water. Fields were prepared but not planted too early. Mentally, the transition was complex. Relief existed, but it was mixed with fatigue. Endurance had taken its toll. Vikings allowed themselves to rest into the new season rather than rush toward it. Winter discipline did not disappear. It softened gradually, leaving behind habits of planning, restraint, and shared responsibility. These habits shaped Viking life long after the coldest nights were forgotten. As this long part settles quietly, imagine a world slowly reopening. Snow retreats unevenly. Fire still burns at night. People move more, but cautiously. Winter is gone, but its lessons remain, guiding life forward with calm awareness. Long after the coldest night of the year had passed, its presence remained alive in the Viking world. It did not stay as fear, but as memory. This memory lived quietly inside routines, habits, and decisions. Winter was remembered not through dates or records, but through behavior shaped by experience. Vikings carried winter in their bodies. Muscles remembered stiffness. Skin remembered cracking cold. Lungs remembered sharp air. Even in warmer months, these sensations guided movement and caution. People did not forget what cold could do. They adjusted instinctively without conscious thought. Children who lived through harsh winters learned lessons early. They remembered nights when fire was watched closely, when silence filled the longhouse, when food was rationed carefully. These memories became reference points. Later in life, these children became the adults who planned earlier, prepared more thoroughly, and acted more cautiously. Elders held the longest memories. They remembered winters that took lives, damaged homes, or weakened communities. These memories shaped authority. Elders were listened to not because of status, but because survival history lived inside them. Their warnings carried weight. Community decisions reflected this collective memory. Settlements chose locations based on shelter from wind. Homes were built thicker. Storage was expanded. Firewood gathering increased. Each choice reflected lessons learned from nights that tested survival. Even during summer, winter was present in thought. Preparation began early. Tools were repaired, clothing was woven, food was preserved. These actions were not driven by fear, but by memory of necessity. Belief systems absorbed these experiences. Stories of cold, darkness, and endurance were passed down, not as horror, but as instruction. They taught patience, restraint, and respect for nature's power. Winter became teacher rather than enemy. Emotionally, memory softened reaction. When winter returned, panic was reduced. People knew what to do. Familiar hardship felt manageable. Experience replaced uncertainty. The coldest night became a measure. It defined what was possible. If that night could be survived, other challenges could be faced calmly. This quiet confidence shaped Viking resilience. Memory also shaped humility. Surviving winter did not create arrogance, it created respect. Nature had allowed survival, not guaranteed it. This understanding kept behavior careful. Over generations, these memories accumulated. Viking culture became shaped by endurance rather than aggression. While known for expansion, their ability to survive harsh environments was equally defining. As this very long part settles into quiet reflection, imagine memories layered like snow across years. Each winter adds weight, but also wisdom. Survival becomes habit. Endurance becomes identity. Over many generations, the repeated experience of surviving the coldest nights of the year slowly reshaped Viking culture itself. Winter was not only a season to endure, it became a force that influenced values, priorities, and social behavior. The lessons learned in darkness and cold settled deeply into how Viking society functioned. Discipline became a cultural norm. Vikings did not value impulsive behavior when survival was at stake. Planning ahead was respected. Those who prepared early for winter earned quiet respect within the community. Carelessness, especially regarding food, fire, or shelter, was viewed as dangerous rather than foolish. Winter taught that mistakes affected everyone. Patience became essential. Quick rewards mattered less than long-term stability. Viking culture favored endurance over immediate comfort. This patience shaped daily decisions, from how food was consumed to how conflicts were handled during harsh seasons. Survival required waiting rather than acting. Resource management became a defining skill. Vikings learned to live within limits set by nature. Overuse of supplies threatened survival. This awareness shaped trade, storage, and even expansion. When Vikings traveled or settled new lands, they carried winter discipline with them, preparing as if cold would return anywhere. Social cooperation strengthened. Winter survival demanded trust. Communities that worked together endured. Those that fractured weakened. Over time, cooperation became embedded in social expectation. Sharing resources during hardship was not charity. It was survival strategy. Leadership was shaped by winter experience. Leaders were valued for foresight rather than dominance. Those who remembered harsh winters guided decisions more carefully. Authority was connected to experience, not force. Belief systems adapted as well. Stories and myths emphasized endurance, cycles, and respect for nature's power. Gods and forces were portrayed as demanding balance rather than obedience. Winter reinforced humility. Family structures reflected these lessons. Elders were respected as carriers of memory. Children were taught restraint early. Winter shaped parenting through example rather than instruction. Even Viking expansion was influenced by winter discipline. Exploration was planned carefully. Settlements were chosen with shelter and resources in mind. The ability to survive harsh climates allowed Vikings to adapt to new lands successfully. Winter survival shaped identity quietly. Strength was measured by preparation, not bravado. Endurance mattered more than speed. Calm mattered more than aggression. The coldest night of the year thus became more than an event. It became a foundation. Each generation inherited not just land and tools, but habits shaped by long nights of survival. As this very long part settles into calm reflection, imagine centuries passing, winters repeating, lessons deepening. Viking society moves forward carrying winter inside it, shaping life long after the cold fades. When the coldest night of the year is viewed through the full arc of Viking life, it stops being a single moment of danger and becomes something much larger. It becomes a lens through which the entire rhythm of existence can be understood. Winter was not an interruption to life. It was one of its defining structures. The Vikings did not divide their year into comfort and hardship. Instead, they understood life as a cycle of preparation, endurance, and recovery. The coldest night was simply the point where this cycle was most visible. Everything before it led toward survival. Everything after it reflected the cost of endurance. This perspective shaped how Vikings thought about time. The future was never abstract. It was always connected to memory. Past winters informed present decisions. Present discipline protected future survival. Time moved slowly, measured by seasons rather than moments. The coldest night forced clarity. On that night, nothing unnecessary mattered. Status, ambition, and excess faded. Only warmth, shelter, food, and awareness remained. This stripping away revealed what Viking society truly depended on. Simplicity was not a choice. It was survival. Over generations, this clarity influenced values. What mattered most was not constant growth, but continuity. The goal was not to avoid hardship, but to pass through it intact. This mindset shaped how Vikings treated land, resources, and one another. The coldest night also reinforced humility. Nature did not bend to human desire. Storms came when they came. Cold arrived without warning or mercy. Survival depended on respect rather than control. This respect kept behavior measured and cautious. Emotionally, the night taught restraint. Panic wasted energy. Hope without discipline caused mistakes. Calm focus preserved life. These lessons extended beyond winter into every part of Viking culture. Even when Vikings traveled far from their homeland, this mindset followed them. New lands were assessed through winter memory. Shelter was prioritized. Storage was built early. Fire was protected. Cold was expected everywhere, even where it had not yet been experienced. The coldest night thus shaped identity. Vikings became people who planned deeply, endured quietly, and recovered slowly. Their resilience was not loud. It was steady. As this very long part settles into calm reflection, imagine the coldest night not as a single frozen darkness, but as a thread running through generations. Each winter tightens it. Each survival strengthens it. Life continues, shaped by the memory of cold long after warmth returns. As this long journey through the Viking winter comes gently to its end, the coldest night of the year no longer feels like a single test of endurance. It feels like a quiet summary of how life itself was lived in the far north. The night gathers together everything the Vikings understood about survival, patience, memory, and restraint. The coldest night did not demand heroism. It demanded consistency. It rewarded those who remembered what others had forgotten, those who planned before fear arrived, those who accepted limits instead of challenging them. Survival came not from defiance, but from alignment with the world as it was. In that frozen darkness, Viking life narrowed to its essentials. Fire burned steadily. Bodies rested carefully. Food was eaten with awareness. Movement slowed. Silence deepened. Everything unnecessary fell away. What remained was enough, and being enough was what mattered most. This night was never faced alone. It was carried by families, by communities, by generations of shared knowledge. Each person relied on habits formed long before they were born. Every careful action echoed the memory of winters survived by others. When morning finally returned, it did not erase the night. It absorbed it. The coldest hours left their mark in routines, in planning, in quiet caution that lasted long after warmth returned. Life continued, shaped gently but firmly by what had been endured. The Vikings did not remember the coldest night as trauma. They remembered it as instruction. It taught them how to live slowly, how to prepare deeply, and how to remain steady when conditions could not be changed. This knowledge became part of who they were. As time passed, as winters repeated, and as generations changed, the night remained present in culture, belief, and behavior. It shaped houses and clothing. It shaped leadership and cooperation. It shaped how people measured success, not by comfort, but by continuation. Now, as we let this history rest, imagine the far northern land settling into silence once more. Snow lies still. Fire glows softly inside longhouses. Breath rises slowly in cold air. The night is deep, but it is no longer threatening. It is familiar. Here the story grows quiet. Here the coldest night becomes memory. Here survival turns into understanding.